thank you for joining Sweet William's Legacy Foundation for Children's Mental Health Week. We've had a number of posts over this week to help and support families who have suffered from child loss, that currently have children and siblings of child loss. And today we have an expert to talk to us a little bit more on the subject. So I'd like to introduce everyone to Annie Evans.
Hello, welcome. Thank you very much, Harry. So I just give you a little bit of background about me. My name is Annie Evans and I am the clinical program leader for a large children's charity. We're working with mental health in primary schools and secondary schools. So that's my background. And as well as that, I am also William's Granny Annie and William's big brothers Oliver and Alfie's Granny Annie. So I have both clinical experience and personal experience through Harry and Mairead of child loss.
And with obviously having this great resource, it feels weird talking about you as a resource, but having the resource of Annie at the time when William was born was massively helpful when it came to talking to Oliver and Alfie about William. So what I wanted to do was get Annie on a video here today so that she can go over that advice that she kindly gave us, and hopefully it will be able to help other people in the future as well.
I think obviously the children, whatever age they are, so siblings are going to be different ages. Ollie and Alfie were 3, but they could be a bit older, they could be a bit younger. And depending on their age, their understanding of what is happening is going to change. The developmental understanding will be different at different ages. So with Ollie and Alfie, they didn't really understand any of it, to be honest. They just knew that they were going to have a brother and he was going to come home, and he was about to come home and he didn't. What they will understand, of course, is that they can see just how devastated the family around them were, and were for a long time and continue to be in many ways. So it was about explaining to them why William hadn't come home, and also explaining about why other people might be upset, and that at times they might cry. And that's okay, because we all cry when we're upset. So it's about normalizing it and explaining to children of that age what happened to William without there being any fear of the same thing being able to happen to them. So some people might say things like, it's very hard to talk about the word, death or dying, particularly in relation to a baby. And so lots of people might use other kind of what sounds like more comfortable ways of saying it, like, they're sleeping or they've gone to bed, or any of those kinds of expressions. And those are very difficult for young children, because of course they go to bed every night and they go to sleep. So we don't want to couch it in a way that might be frightening to them. So I would be aware of those kinds of things as to how you might say what is a very difficult conversation. As the child gets, if you have older siblings, then the concerns are often, they'll have an understanding perhaps of loss and death, and they might therefore panic that other people in their family, particularly you as their parents, are going to die. If this is the first time they have experience of it, there's a sudden panic that, gosh, well, could I die? Or will you die, mummy or daddy? And that's the fear, more than the loss of the child. And also the fear that they can see that you are so upset, obviously, and you're their life, you're their stability. So explaining to them the emotions behind it, and that it is okay to cry when we're upset and we're sad, but we give each other a hug and we tell each other we love each other, and we're going to help each other through our sadness. As siblings are older, and maybe looking at sort of teenagehood, it's really hard, I think, often for teenagers. They're going through a lot of mixed emotions themselves. So to have the added emotions of their parents being desperately sad as well can be very hard for them. And what they will often do is try to be perfect for you so that they're not adding to your burden. They take on your burden a lot. Or it could just be too much, and they'll sort of tend to back away into their friendship group or into their bedrooms. So there's a lot of different ways that it can come out within their behavior, but it's also about understanding their developmental needs as to how we explain it to them. What age group are we looking at? That's the most important thing. And that's what we looked at when we were looking at Ollie and Alfie.
As time has gone on and as kind of the boys have gotten older and developed more, is of course we've been able to explain a little bit more and a little bit more and feed that information to them without overloading too much or giving them more information than they're able to understand. And I think that's a key thing that we've wanted to be focused on is what could almost have a negative impact and what could be something that is counterproductive and almost essentially a list of what not to do. And of course, it's not as easy as just having a checklist of do's and don'ts, but is there things that you feel are negative impacts or things people need to have conscious thoughts to try and avoid?
Well, I think it's immensely difficult because at the end of the day, it's the hardest thing in the world as adults to go through. And as children, they will pick up on the fact that it's the hardest thing for us to go through. And I think it's the most important thing is to normalize that sometimes there are things that make all of us sad, including mummy and daddy or granny and granddad or whoever it happens to be. So I think the most important thing is to keep talking about emotions. And that's very hard when you're very emotional and you're feeling close to tears anyway. So I think to get the support you need in order to be able to have those tears and to really be able to lose it so that when you're with the younger children, you're able to hold it together a bit. Crying's fine, but just normalize it. It's in order to help the children to stay safe, because at that age, they need to know that they are safe and that nothing's going to happen to them. So I think that's a really important part of it. It's very hard because, we all get things wrong. There's no perfect way of doing anything. And this is the hardest thing to do. But I would very much try and get as much support as you can from those around you. So schools, nurseries. I know your nursery with Ollie and Alfie were great. And I think the thing to look out for is how it is impacting the children from an emotional perspective. So children cannot articulate their emotions. They can't say, you know what, I'm really worried about you and daddy because you're going through the worst thing ever. What tends to happen is their behavior might get worse, or they might regress a little. Those that were going to bed really easily might not go to bed so easily. They might kick up a much more of a fuss. They might play up more. You might have regression in terms of bedwetting or wetting themselves generally. All of those kinds of things are a sign that the child is unhappy and unsettled, rather than unhappy, perhaps is a better way of putting it. But equally, those things can happen when the baby comes home. We often see that if a baby comes home with young children, that the older siblings will regress a bit. Children a little bit older might start having more problems at school, fighting a little bit more, bad behavior, that kind of thing. So behavior is always the sign in children that there's an emotion underneath the behavior. So don't judge the behavior. Think about what the emotion is underneath it and help the child to deal with that emotion. I think that's the most important thing, is to remember that any behavior, whether it's as children or adults, is always based on an emotion. What's the emotion underneath it?
Regards to honouring your children as a whole family and kind of keeping them as part of the family, it can be an upsetting thing to do for both parents and for the children, the siblings. But is that something that is viewed on as the kind of the right way to go about it.
So you mean keeping the child that you've lost as part of the family, as very much part of the family unit? Is that what you mean?
Yes, and kind of talking about them, having pictures of them around. Like I say, that can be a very upsetting thing to deal with, but at the same time, there's for us certainly it's something that we've very much wanted to have as part of the family. I imagine there's families that aren't sure whether or not that's the best way to go about it, or if it's better to kind of not mention it and not have the upset in the short term, but whether or not that's short-term gain but long-term issues and effects.
I think the most important thing is that children understand why there's sadness or why life has changed in some way. And so to be able to help the children talk about life's difficulties, because awful as it is to say, they've experienced loss way too young, and they've experienced what that can do to a family unit way too young. So it's about supporting them in understanding that the family unit still continues. If, as a family, in the way that you have, you've wanted to really include William in the family unit, then I think that's a wonderful thing to do. I think the one difficulty that can, just to be aware of, is of course a child who is lost at birth or during a miscarriage never grows up to be a naughty child. They never get to do all the awful things that all the rest of us tend to do. We are all badly behaved, we all say rude things, we all do nasty things, but a child who doesn't live doesn't get to do any of those things. So they can become an angel child. And that's a very hard thing for a sibling to live up to, because that child is always perfect and maybe I'm not. And so understanding as parents that those babies are precious and gorgeous children, they could also have grown up to be little monkeys, just like the rest of them. And that's what we've also got to keep in mind for the children that are left behind, because they can never, ever get onto that same pedestal in the same way. So remember, just to remember that in idolizing an angelifying, I don't think that's a word, but anyway, children, we must do it with all children, whether they are with us or not. I think that's the most important thing. I think the most important thing that I would say is, please remember, none of us get this right. None of us have been down this path before. It's unique for everyone. Even if you've lost children, God forbid, before, each child and each loss is individual. So don't beat yourself up to get it perfect. There's no such thing as perfect. Reach out, get the help that you need to get the help that the children need. And so what I would say is, email Sweet William's Legacy if you do need some support, and Harry and I, Mairead, can certainly think about what support might be most relevant to you in your particular circumstance. But there are lots of great charities and support out there if you need them. Thanks very much, Harry, for giving me the opportunity for talking to people during Children's Mental Health Week. It's really important.
Thank you, and thank you for giving us the time to talk today, and thank you everyone who's watched this, and I hope that you've gained some really good insight. And as Annie said, if there's any help or support that Sweet William's Legacy can give, then please do contact us.
Thanks a lot.